The whale landed on a quiet shore far, far away from the cove of Samothos. Artaxerxes was most particular about that. There, Mrs. Artaxerxes and the whale were left, while the wizard, with Roverandom in his pocket, walked a couple of miles or so to the neighboring seaside town to get an old suit and a green hat and some tobacco, in exchange for the wonderful suit of velvet, which created a sensation in the streets. He also purchased a bath chair for Mrs. Artaxerxes. You must not forget her tail. Please, Mr. Artaxerxes, began Roverandom once more when they were sitting on the beach again in the afternoon. The wizard was smoking a pipe with his back against the whale, looking happier than he had done for a long while, and not at all busy. What about my proper shape, if you don't mind, and my proper size too, please? Oh, very well, said Artaxerxes. I thought I might just have had a nap before getting busy, but I don't mind. Let's get it over. Where's my... And then he stopped short. He suddenly remembered that he had burnt and thrown away all his spells at the bottom of the deep blue sea. He really was dreadfully upset. He got up and felt in his trouser pockets and his waistcoat pockets and his coat pockets inside and out, and he could not find the least bit of magic anywhere in any of them. Of course not, the silly old fellow. He was so flustered that he had even forgotten that it was only an hour or two since he had bought his suit in a pawnbroker's shop. As a matter of fact, it had belonged to, or at any rate been sold by, an elderly butler, and he had gone through his pockets pretty thoroughly first. The wizard sat down and mopped his forehead with a purple handkerchief, looking thoroughly miserable again. I really am very, very sorry, he said. I never meant to leave you like this forever and ever, but now I don't see that it can be helped. Let it be a lesson to you not to bite the trousers of nice, kind wizards. Ridiculous nonsense, said Mrs. Artaxerxes. Nice, kind wizard indeed. There is no nice or kind or wizard about you. If you don't give the little dog back his shape and size at once, and what's more, I shall go back to the bottom of the deep blue sea and never come back to you again. Poor old Artaxerxes looked almost as worried as he did when the sea serpent was giving trouble. My dear, he said, I'm very sorry, but I went and put my very strongest anti-removal spell Preserver on that dog. After Samothos began to interfere, drat him, and just to show him that he can't do everything, and that I won't have sand rabbit wizards interfering in my private bit of fun, and I quite forgot to save the antidote when I was clearing up down below. I used to keep it in a little black bag hanging on the door in my workshop. Dear, dear me, I am sure you'll agree that it was only meant to be a bit of fun, he said, turning to Roverandom, and his old nose got very large and red with his distress. He went on saying, Dear, dear, dearie me, and shaking his head and beard, and he never noticed that Roverandom was not taking any notice, and the whale was winking. Mrs. Artaxerxes had got up and gone to her luggage, and now she was laughing and holding out an old black bag in her hand. Now, stop wagging your beard and get to business, she said, but when Artaxerxes saw the bag, he was too surprised for a moment to do anything but look at it, with his old mouth wide open. Come along, said his wife. It is your bag, isn't it? I picked it up and several other little ottomans that belonged to me on the nasty rubbish heap you made in the garden. She opened the bag to peep inside, and out jumped the wizard's magic fountain pen wand, and also a cloud of funny smoke came out, twisting itself into strange shapes and curious faces. Then Artaxerxes woke up. Here, give it to me. You're wasting it, he cried, and he grabbed Roverandom by the scruff of his neck and popped him kicking and yapping into the bag before you could say knife. Then he turned the bag round 3 times, waving the pen in the other hand, and Thank you, that'll do nicely, he said, and opened the bag. There was a loud bang, and lo and behold, there was no bag, only Rover, just as he had been, before he first met the wizard on that morning on the lawn. Well, perhaps not just the same. He was a bit bigger, and now he was some months older. It is no good trying to describe how excited he felt, or how funny and smaller everything seemed, even the oldest whale, nor how strong and ferocious Rover felt. For just one moment he looked longingly at the wizard's trousers, but he did not want the story to begin all over again. So, after he had run a mile in circles for joy, and nearly barked his head off, he came back and said, "Thank you," and even added, "Very pleased to have met you," which was very polite indeed. "That's all right," said Artaxerxes, "and that's the last magic I shall do. I am going to retire, and you had better be getting home. I have no magic left to send you home with, so you'll have to walk, but that won't hurt a strong young dog." So Rover said goodbye, and the whale winked, and Mrs. Artaxerxes gave him a piece of cake, and that was the last he saw of them for a long while. Long, long afterwards, when he was visiting a seaside palace that he had never been to before, He found out what had happened to them, for they were there. Not the whale, of course, but the retired wizard and his wife. They had settled into that seaside town, and Artaxerxes, taking the name of Mr. A. Pam, had set up a cigarette and chocolate shop near the beach, but he was very, very careful never to touch the water, even fresh water, and he found that no hardship. A poor trade for a wizard, but he did at least try to clear up the nasty mess that his customers made on the beach, and he made a very good deal of money out of Pam's rock, which was very pink and sticky. There may have been the least bit of magic in it, for children liked it so much that they went on eating it even after they dropped it in the sand. But Mrs. Artaxerxes, I should say Mrs. A. Pam, made much more money. She kept bathing tents and vans, and gave swimming lessons, and drove home in a bath chair drawn by white ponies, and wore the Mer King's jewels in the afternoon, and became very famous, so that no one ever alluded to her tale. In the meanwhile, however, Rover is plodding down the country lanes and highways, going along following his nose, which is bound to lead him home in the end, as dogs' noses do. All the man in the moon's dreams don't come true, then, just as he said himself, thought Rover as he padded along. This was evidently one that didn't. I don't know what the name of the place or the little boy lives, and that's a pity. The dry land, he found, was often as dangerous a place for a dog as the moon or the ocean, though much duller. Motor after motor racketed by, filled, Rover thought, with the same people, all making all speed, and all dust and all smell to somewhere. I don't believe half of them know where they are going to, or why they are going there, or would know it if they got there, grumbled Rover as he coughed and choked, and his feet got tired on the hard, gloomy black roads, so he turned into the fields, and had many mild adventures of the bird and rabbit sort in an aimless kind of way, and more than one enjoyable fight with other dogs, and several hurried flights from larger dogs. And so, at last, weeks or months since the tale began, he could not have told you which. He got back to his own garden gate, and there was a little boy playing on the lawn with the yellow ball, and the dream had come true, just as he had never expected. "There's Roverandom," cried Little Boy 2 with a shout, and Rover sat up and begged and could not find his voice to bark anything, and the little boy kissed his head and went dashing into the house crying, "Here's my little begging dog! Come back, large and real!" He told his grandmother all about it. How was Rover to know that he had belonged to the little boy's grandmother all the while? He had only belonged to her a month or two when he was bewitched, but I wonder how much Psamathe and Artaxerxes had known about it. The grandmother, very surprised indeed, as she was at her dog's return, looking so well and not motor smashed or lorry flattened at all, did not understand what on earth the little boy was talking about, though he told her all she knew about it very exactly, and over again. She gathered with a great deal of trouble, she was of course just the weeest bit deaf, that the dog was to be called Roverandom and not Rover, because the man in the moon said so. What odd ideas the child has, to be sure. And that he belonged not to her after all, but to Little Boy 2, because Mummy brought him home with the shrimps. Very well, my dear, if you like, but I thought I bought him from the gardener's brother's son. I haven't told you all their argument, of course. It was long and complicated, as it often is when both sides are right. All that you want to know is that he was called Roverandom after that, and he did belong to the little boy, and went back when the boy's visit to their grandmother was over, to the house where he had once sat on the chest of drawers. He never did that again, of course. He lived sometimes in the country, and sometimes, most of the time, in the white house on the cliff by the sea. He got to know old Psamathe very well, never well enough to leave out the P, but well enough, when he was grown up to a large and dignified dog, to dig him out of the sand in his sleep and have many and many a chat with him. Indeed, Roverandom grew to be very wise and had an immense local reputation and had all sorts of other adventures, many of which the little boy shared. But the ones I have told you about were probably the most unusual and the most exciting. Only Tinker says she does not believe a word of them. Jealous cat. The end.